Okay, and before I turn you over to the sponsor, I just wanted to take a couple minutes to go through a little bit of what's going on in our world at SQF. We have one information day remaining for 2018, and that is happening in tandem with the Food Safety Consortium. It's going to happen the day before the actual conference. And for those of you that don't know what an information day is, it's basically like a day-long face-to-face informational seminar. And the whole purpose of it is to introduce food suppliers at all levels of the supply chain to the benefits of food safety certification. So it's kind of like a, how do you get started and what is this all about? And let's see, if you are interested in attending, you can just head over to the events page on our site and you can register straight from there. Now, I'm sure lots of you have already seen this before, but in case you didn't know about this, SQFI has a monthly newsletter that comes out about the middle to the end of each month. And in this publication, we post recent news, updates from SQF, and some information on upcoming trainings and events. So we try to condense what would be many individual e-blasts and emails into kind of this one big publication so we don't inundate your inboxes. We try. So if you are not already subscribed and you would like to be, just head to our website and there should be a pop-up that allows you to sign up, and we will be happy to add you to our email list. Let's see here, what's next? As you know, we have a variety of training courses that we host at SQFI, and these are the 2 courses that we have left in 2018. Our classes all pretty much fill up very quickly, so if either of these are of interest to you, make sure that you reserve your seat now because, like I said, they do fill up pretty fast. And the only other opportunity that we have to get some training courses in from SQFI, aside from those 2 for the end of the year, that will actually be at our annual conference that's going to be held in about 2 weeks in Atlanta, Georgia. So as you can imagine, we're all pretty busy preparing for that. If you are able to attend, we hope that you will consider going. And for those that are already registered, we are looking forward to seeing you there in a few weeks. But we feel that our conference is a very valuable opportunity for all kinds of SQF stakeholders to help you gain some knowledge and skills that will help you strengthen the food safety and quality programs in your facilities. And it's also a pretty good opportunity to network with your peers and enhance your own professional training and professional development. Let's see, so the next slide, this gives you a snapshot, but we have more information on our website. And last but certainly not least, I am so excited to announce that we will be launching a new website in a matter of a couple of weeks. And this new website will be more visually appealing. It'll be easier to navigate. And we're going to synthesize a lot of the information that we have on our old current site that really hasn't been updated since about, I want to say, 2010, 2009. It's been a while. So we're really excited for this new update. And really, that's it for me and what's going on in SQF. Thank you for your patience while I run through that really quickly. In case you need to reach out to any of us, here's some of our contact information. And now what I'd like to do is actually hand the mic over to Erasmo Salazar, who will be giving you a word from our event sponsor, which is Lloyd's Register.
Thank you, Leslie. Here we're going to talk about Lloyd's Register, who we are and what we're doing. Leslie, can you put the next slide, please?
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, I am Erasmo Salazar. I am the Food Safety Technical Manager for the Americas at Lloyd's Register. Been doing this in the last 14 years, auditing and providing GFSI training in Lloyd's Register. Next, please. Lloyd's Register is a leading provider of professional assurance services. We specialize in GFSI recognized certification and training, as well as customized and second-party programs. We have very successful supply chain programs that we deliver. We have over 33,000 clients in the food and drink sector. That goes from the primary sectors, from agriculture to aquaculture to ingredients, food manufacturing, storage, distribution, retailers. And we are one of the few certification bodies that goes from farm to fork. And we are a nonprofit organization. Our mission is to make the world a safer place. We work in different sectors. Food is just one of them. And the profit we generate found the Lloyd's Register Foundation. It's a charity that supports engineering, related research, education, and public engagement around everything we do. We have more than 200 years of history. To be more precise, we have 258 years. And over the last 30 years, we built our offering to meet changing dynamics of the food and drink supply chain and the needs of our clients in more than 120 countries around the world. Next, please. This is some of our clients we have. As I said before, we serve in different sectors. Food is one of them. And we've been working with them a very long time. Next, please. For additional help or support, please contact us at info-usa@lrqa.com, or you can visit us online at lrqausa.com. You can also follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. Thank you very much.
Awesome.
Thank you so much. Leslie.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Okay, LeAnn, we're ready for you now.
Excellent. Thanks, Leslie, and thanks, Erasimo. Appreciate the welcome and the introductions. And so, good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. I hope you're having a wonderful day so far. My name is LeAnn Chuboff, and I'm the Vice President of Technical Affairs at SQF. And I'm going to be giving you the update to the Edition 8. So I'm giving you some information about Edition 8. Basically, we're here to learn about those key changes. So what I'm going to do is just summarize it to you. Hopefully you've already participated in a webinar where where we went over those changes, but our website has lots of information. I'll get to that in a little bit as well. I'm going to tell you about the key changes. I'm going to share with you the most frequently asked questions. I'm going to give you some data about Edition 8, our scores and most frequently missed questions. And then lastly, I'm going to share with you where you can go for additional answers. So within this next 40 minutes, but please, if you can chat in your questions, if you have specific questions, feel free to chat them in. Hopefully, I can monitor that while I'm giving the presentation, but then, Leslie, I'll ask that you can monitor those questions and then perhaps at the end just ask them if I didn't get to them, if you could ask them to me at the end if I didn't get to them. So I'd appreciate that. So here we go. As you know, Edition 8, we went from one code, 7.2, to basically 7 different codes. We had a level 1, which was our fundamentals program, and then we had 5 separate food safety codes: manufacturing, primary, storage and distribution, food packaging, and retail, and then all the way to the quality code, its own separate quality code. So we went from one basic code that had a prescription for everybody. We were trying to say one size fits all, and what we realized is that one size didn't fit all, and we needed to break them out into their relevant industry scope. So storage and distribution now has its own risks that they have to monitor, and they don't have to adhere to the manufacturing risk. Same thing with manufacturer of food packaging and primary as well. So we wanted to make that a good fit. And then with the quality code, what we were realizing with level 3 is that the same auditors conducting those food safety audits were also conducting the quality audits, and some of them didn't really have the experience that they need to have in order to audit against the quality code. So we wanted to separate that out. Additionally, we wanted to put the quality back in the quality code. So we added more information about process controls. We added more information on quality itself and really focused on the quality aspects of it versus having it combined with food safety as well. Alrighty. So an update to the update. We already have an update to it. And what we did actually is we no longer have our food safety fundamentals codes. Instead, we have a fundamentals program now. We still have our food safety codes, that's still 8. We still have our quality code, that's still edition 8. However, our fundamentals code is a brand new program now, and this is edition 1. So this is the SQF fundamentals program. And what the SQF fundamentals program does, it is based on the GFSI Global Markets Program. It is not benchmarked to GFSI. So before you ask the question is, can I do edition 1 of the fundamentals instead of edition 8 of the food safety codes, my answer is ask your retailer, ask your buyer, because if they're requesting a GFSI benchmark scheme, then you cannot do this. So the fundamentals is for small local suppliers that are just starting out on their food safety journey. That it is using a global input to develop this code based off the GFSI Global Markets Program. So its focus is more on implementation versus documentation. It has a base. It has a focus on fundamentals food safety, so it doesn't have the detail that the food safety codes have. And for those local and small suppliers, this is a solution that could be how to get started, because that's the question that we always get is how can we get started with food safety, and how can I reach out to my buyers and let them know that I have a good food safety program, or demonstrate that I have a good food safety program. So this fundamentals program, it has 2 commodities. It looks at primary as well as manufacturing. It has 2 different approaches, basic and intermediate. So basic has a written food safety plan, where intermediate has full HACCP or a HACCP-based program. So again, like I said, the focus is on implementation, not so much about documentation. It does follow a global stakeholder input as it relates to the Global Markets Program. It has those 2 levels to help you get started with your food safety journey. The goal is that once somebody or a site starts with the fundamentals, they'll transfer into one of the food safety codes and go through GFSI benchmarking. What we created was an approach that a supplier can use so that it uses the same language, even the same numbering as it does for the fundamentals all the way into the food safety program. So it's just a new introduction or a modification of our food safety fundamentals, but it's a brand new program that we offered. And what we know is that it's not just having a code, but basically it's understanding how can I implement this code. And that's the toughest part. And this is where we're developing training. We're using a 3-pronged approach where all 3 kind of feed into each other. So there's an instructor-led course, there's an online course available, and tip sheets. So we're in the process of creating the instructor-led and the online course. But those tip sheets are available right now, and I want to share that with you regardless if you're doing fundamentals or not doing fundamentals, because these tip sheets really can provide some good information and supplemental information for you. And you can find these tip sheets right on our website, SQFI.com. Right now we have over 20 different tip sheets. The tip sheets are about subject matter. So there's a tip sheet about getting started. There's a tip sheet about management commitment. There's a tip sheet on how to conduct a risk assessment. So if you go to our website, SQFI.com, on the home page, you'll click on the Fundamentals Food Safety Program. So you just click on the Fundamentals Food Safety Program. Scroll down and you'll see a link to all these different tip sheets that are there. So feel free. You don't have to be part of the fundamentals program to use these tip sheets. It's just another tool to help you understand and get going with the SQF program. So it's just another tool that's out there. So going back to Edition 8, I just kind of wanted to share with you where we were with scores. So audit scores, if you look at excellent, good, comply, and fail, looking at announced versus unannounced. So as you know, we have our announced and our unannounced audits. But under Edition 8, the unannounced audits for if you're doing really well, you're continuously doing very well, and it's about 49 to 51% excellent. Good, 44 to 41% under that, and under compliant or C comply, the unannounced kind of outrank the announced ones, and same thing with fail to comply. If it's an unannounced audit, they have like a 1% chance of failing, but really there isn't that many fails among the program so far. But the unannounced audit is still a part of the Edition 8 program. I also want to share with you those top non-conformances that we're seeing under Edition 8. No surprise that under the major non-conformance, it's about food fraud. It's about understanding and having a food fraud program. The major is basically there because the food fraud program wasn't in existence. They didn't realize that they needed to have that a site needed to have a food fraud program, but that's the major nonconformance. And same thing with environmental monitoring, because as you'll know, that requirement was moved from Module 11 into the Module 2 or the system elements, and it's not having that risk assessment conducted for environmental monitoring. The rest, minors are in food defense, and the lack of review of the program. As you know, that was added to Edition 8. And then the rest basically are in, floors, walls, and ceilings, and there will always be cracks or dirt and buildup and flaky paint and stuff like that, and that's where most of the nonconformities are. We also have nonconformities in food fraud under minor, and that's the execution of the food fraud program. And missing from the food fraud program is looking at the full gamut of looking at the suppliers as well as looking at the site itself, and I'll go into some of the requirements under food fraud in just a little bit as well. So here are the top nonconformances that we have. Give you a second to look at those. Okay, so now what I want to give you is my top changes for Edition 8. So the top 8 for Edition 8, and I'll do them David Letterman style from the bottom up. So number 8, my number 8 top addition for Edition 8 is the new option for annual unannounced audits. And so unannounced audits didn't go away. It's still 1 in every 3 years an unannounced audit has to occur. What we did add in there is an option so that a site can go through annual unannounced audits. And that means that they can volunteer to have an unannounced audit every single year. And instead of making that mandatory or, the stick instead, or giving the carrot instead of the stick, we are recognizing these sites on their certificate as a SQF Select site. And as an SQF Select site, they would be recognized by their buyer as a site that has volunteered to do unannounced audits. Because what we found and what you can see is that scores really don't change so much between announced and unannounced audits. However, what we do here is that management commitment changes a bit of the unannounced audit year. There's a lot of focus and dedication to the SQF practitioner and to the site itself, because the unknown is always kind of scary. So what we wanted to do was make every year an unannounced audit year, but we didn't want to mandate it. So it's just an option now that sites can go through annually. We also have different codes for specific industry sectors, and that comes in at number 7. So as I mentioned before, we now have those 5 different food safety codes, a new code for retail, but it's broken out into the different industry sectors so that we could focus on the risks of those industry sectors. And I think I'm really happy about that, because when we were reviewing these codes and updating these codes, there is a lot of areas that we needed to focus on within these industry sectors. For example, food packaging, labeling requirements that are there, as well as using recycled materials, etc. So I'm really excited that we broke those out. And on number 6, I'm happy that we added those food fraud requirements in there. We don't know what we don't know about food fraud. And the more I hear about what's happening out in the food fraud industry, especially there was a recent article about honey in Australia and olive oil, imported into the U.S. And so the more we don't know about food fraud, we're never going to find out if we don't look for it. So I'm happy that we added the food fraud requirements, and now sites are required to do some investigation as it relates to their facility. We updated all the training programs for the industry scope. So at number 5 is the fact that there are specific training programs for each of those codes. There's training programs not just for manufacturing and primary, but there's a training program for storage and distribution, for food packaging, retail, and quality. They can be found through our training centers. So we have about 30 different training centers, SQF licensed training centers, that have access to these training programs. So if you are in a particular industry scope, you can seek out one of our training centers and go to them for guidance, go to them for a training class. SQF does have online training as well. So our online training in manufacturing, and we have online training for food quality. And so you can go right to our website if you want to access online training. But having that available, I think, is very helpful to all of our stakeholders. At number 4 is putting the quality back into the quality code, and that is actually separating out that quality code so that we could focus in and zero in on those quality issues and have good auditors that understand quality go and audit against this quality code. So the emphasis is on HACCP for quality, or understanding where your critical quality points are or your threats to your product. So where your quality points are in your operation and the measures that you take to ensure those quality points are being met. It could be color, it could be taste, it could be odor, it could be size. But understanding what that is and then putting in specific quality points in there. And then a lot of emphasis on process controls, and I'll go over that when we go over the changes to the quality code. We did, if I could have a favorite code element, it would be number 3, and that's the new element regarding equipment design and specifications. And what I like about this is the fact that I've been a long time in QA, and I've worked in manufacturing, and I did a lot of audits myself. And what I know is when I was in there is that QA never really had a say on equipment design, especially equipment new to the facility. New equipment we all love. It's the refurbished or the old, not the old equipment, but it's the refurbished equipment that's new to your site. And oftentimes it's not the right design for the product itself. And QA and maintenance and sanitation have to figure out a way to maintain it. They have to figure out a way to clean it. They have to make sure that it is the right equipment for that job. So we put in new requirements that emphasizes that any equipment new to that facility, there needs to be some type of specifications that outlines what that design should be, the intended purpose of that equipment, and I'll go over that as well. Number 2 is the emphasis on senior management, and what I like about this one is our addition to the senior site management is really putting an emphasis on resources and putting an emphasis on competency of site personnel. And so we put more requirements in there to emphasize how important senior site management is in order to build that culture of food safety in the environment. The number one top 8 for Edition 8 is the stronger requirements on what causes recalls. And what our emphasis was this year and what we had were stretch goals to reduce our recalls by 30%, especially recalls caused by environmental pathogens such as Listeria and Salmonella, as well as allergens and the mislabeling of allergens. And so what we did is take a look at these reasons for recalls and put in stronger requirements around those reasons for recalls. For example, for environmental monitoring, as you know, we had that in Module 11 under high-risk facilities. So any site that was deemed high risk was required to have an environmental monitoring program. But what we were finding is that in some instances when a recall happened against an SQF site for Listeria, we looked at that audit report, and the audit report was deemed non-applicable for environmental monitoring. And we were wondering why, and the reason is that the site and the auditor decided that they were not a high-risk facility, so environmental monitoring was not applicable. And it puzzled us because if they were making anything that required any type of environmental monitoring that should have been deemed high risk, or the environmental monitoring requirements should have been evaluated. So instead, what we did is pull that into Module 2 now as a system element under food safety, and required that all sites need to evaluate their environment to determine if there is a risk for environmental pathogens. And so we put that into Module 2. And same thing with allergens. What we looked at with allergens was the reasons for recalls, and the reasons for recalls differed than the most commonly non-conformance to allergens. And the most common non-conformance to allergens was the validation after cleaning during, between changeovers. And the most common recall is mislabeling of allergens, specifically during changeovers. And so what we did is add more requirements on allergens, and more specific requirements on allergens, especially during changeovers, and I'll go over that in a little bit as well. Okay, before I go on, there were a lot of questions that came in, and I'm just going to go ahead and see if I can answer these and cross them off our list real quick, so while they're top of mind. So first question is, for distribution, 2.4.8 says non-applicable. SQF is a HACCP-based, and therefore environmental monitoring should be based on your risk assessment. Yeah, so there has been some discussion as if we should add environmental back into storage and distribution, and that's something that we'll probably consider for 8.1. And then a question is, how can SBC be applicable to a distributor with no CCPs or CQPs? We'll go over that when I go into the Edition 8 question. So I'll tag that for, or when I go into the quality code discussion. I get that as well. I get that question a lot. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so there is Edition 8.0 checklist on our website. The question is, will there be Edition 8.0 audit checklist be made? So there is one on our website. Feel free to go right there. It's right there on our website. If a contract manufacturer complies with either the basic or intermediate fundamentals, does that satisfy 2342? That's up to the site itself. So I will say the fundamentals program isn't a direct match to the food safety code, or to the SQF food safety code. So that depends on how that is going to be applied to the site. So it's not a direct match for the food safety code, but it could be a good start. The fundamentals course is just for fundamentals, but those tip sheets, while they are geared to the fundamentals. They really, the subjects themselves, take them all the way to how it would be for a food safety code as well. I find them very helpful for me as well. Okay, food fraud vulnerability assessment mitigation strategy is a challenging area, and I'll go over that when we talk about food fraud, and so I can go over a little bit more. So some of these questions I'm going to go ahead and save for when I go into that discussion. So S-SAFE for the fraud assessment, as told by auditor, doesn't cover all elements of code. Is there a better fraud assessment tool out there? And again, I'll get to those resources that we have. And again, it's really up to the discretion to make sure that you are meeting the requirements of your site as it relates to food fraud, as well as meeting the requirements of the code. And I'm not quite sure exactly what S-SAFE doesn't cover, but I'll give you some of the resources that we have. Okay. Okay, and the last question that I see here is, does SQF Fundamentals for Manufacturing replace Good Manufacturing Practices for Food Products Module 11? No, it does not. So the Fundamentals program is a completely different program. So the Fundamentals program is for those small suppliers. It has different system elements than it does for the Food Safety Code. It basically uses the same GMPs as it does for the Food Safety Code. However, those system elements are different, so that Module 2 is different. So no, it is completely different, and it's not a substitute for the GMPs that are in Module 11. So if you're under the Food Safety Code because you're doing a GFSI benchmarked audit, then you need to adhere to the system elements under the Food Safety Code and the GMPs under the relevant module, whether it's 9, 10, 11, 7, whatever it might be. Alrighty. So just get into a little bit more specifics. I'll go over the Part A, and then I'll go over the system elements, and then I'll get into Module 11. I'll summarize the differences in the frequently asked questions within there. I'll go over some of the differences within the primary code, storage and distribution, food packaging, quality, and then we'll get into resources, and hopefully I can get into answering some more of your questions. Alrighty, Part A, food safety update. As I mentioned before, or no, didn't mention before, but now there's an option for corporate audits. It's not mandatory, it's an option, so I did want to emphasize that. The corporate audit is when you have one headquartered site that does some of the programs for many of their sites. So oftentimes corporations that are, headquartered, let's say in Chicago, and they have multiple facilities across the United States. They do their product development, they do their recall, they do their approved supplier programs. Now they can be audited at the corporate as it applies to the to their different sites. So it's not a multi-site option, but it is an option for corporate audits, and it allows some time to be freed up at the site itself, so there can be more commitment walking around the facility, less document review at the site, especially if you have to do it 10 times over the same thing. There's new mandatory elements. Complaint management is now a mandatory element. Allergen management is now a mandatory element, except for feed. It is not a mandatory element. And it's not mandatory in primary either. So allergen management is now a mandatory element. We changed the corrective action closeout time, so it's 30 days for both minors and majors, and we removed OIPs as a response. So it's only non-conformances are minor, major, critical. You can also respond exempt and non-applicable, but OIP is no longer a response. I talked about the annual unannounced audit program. Again, it's voluntary for annual unannounced audit. Is not mandatory, but there is recognition on the certificate as an SQF Select site. We've been talking to our retailers and told them that this is something that means quite a bit. It means strong management commitment. It means that they're ready to be audited at any time, and so it is recognition on the certificate. Again, the carrot before the stick. There is new protocol after suspension. So now if a site is suspended for any of the reasons listed in the code, they'll have a 30-day follow-up audit, and then within 6 months, it's an unannounced audit. And after a site is withdrawn, it's posted on the SQF website for 12 months, and they cannot enter into the SQF program except for waiting 12 months. So there's no protocol after suspension and withdrawal. So some of the frequently asked questions that I get for Part A is, one, has anybody signed up for the Select Site program? And yes, they have. Actually, we had one or two sites that are in the, we have one site that is signed up for sure and another site that's in progress. So I thought there'd be more, but there isn't that many sites that have signed up for that Select Site program. The other question is there a difference between final scores between announced and unannounced audits? Basically, it's about the same. 93.8 and 93.6 is the differences between announced and unannounced as to what we have right now. So really no big differences in the scores that we see. And then the other question that I get is, do I have to do a corporate audit? And the answer is no, you don't. It's between the site and the certification body. Some corporate sites find it easier because it saves time. So the auditor doesn't have to evaluate 10 different, or evaluate the written program for the approved supplier program 10 times versus one time at the corporate site. So what will happen is that an auditor will review the documentation part at the corporate site and the implementation part at the physical site itself. So, it's, like I said, it just frees up the time for the auditor during the site audit itself. A question came in is, what does OIP stand for? And OIP stands for Opportunity for Improvement. It really is a in compliance item. All the auditor is saying is that basically you could improve on this requirement. So you can improve on, implement industry best practices or whatever. It was borderline, what we were finding borderline consultative, and we want to just remove that option out there. So the question came in too is, can you define senior management? Could this be our VP of operations, or does this have to be a monthly meeting with our CEO? And I'll talk about that in just a second. Alrighty. So then speaking on OIP, so will all OIPs now be minors? The thing is that OIP should have been compliant to begin with. So an OIP never should have been a minor. If it was a minor, it was a minor, and it should have been marked as a minor. So OIPs now should be all marked compliant because they were compliant to begin with. Alrighty, so let's go through some of the system element key changes. We looked at, and this is our Module 2, Senior Site Management, Proficiency Testing, the Food Safety Plan, Environmental Monitoring, Food Fraud and Food Defense, and the Allergen Program. And I'll go over some of these as it goes. So management commitment, there was an emphasis on senior site management involvement, specifically 21210, 21211, and 21322. So 21210 is maintaining the SQF system in the event of organizational changes. And as you read this, you'll recognize it's not a written change management program, but basically what the auditor will be looking for is understanding if there have been or will be organizational changes in key personnel or process or whatever it might be, then how will the site ensure that the food safety system will go on unaffected? And that's really what the auditor is looking to see, is that if the plant manager changes, for example, or if there is an organizational change in the QA team leader or whatever, then how will the certificate still be intact and the food safety plan be unaffected? The third change was 21211, and this is that identified blackout dates for the unannounced audit are now auditable. So as you know, unannounced audits are one every 3 years. You can identify blackout dates. Those blackout dates are for operational business purposes only. So if the site isn't operating during a week, during one of the weeks that is the unannounced audit window, then that's identified as a blackout date. Now the auditor will come on site and validate that those blackout dates were indeed true, that they weren't due to the SQF practitioner being on vacation or the plant manager, going on a business trip or whatever it is, but that they were indeed valid because there weren't any operations or process going on at that time. And then thirdly, 2132 is that SQF practitioner and senior site management shall be updated at least monthly. And so I want to talk about what an updated meeting is. So senior site management will have an update at least monthly. And the question is, what is senior site management? And senior site management is the senior-most person on site at that site. So it could be the plant manager, or it could be the VP of operations, it could be whoever. But it's that senior site management. So if you're part of a corporation, you will have, more senior people, but at the site, we want the SQF practitioner and the senior site manager to be updated on the food safety system, the SQF system. And that includes looking at, issues and challenges that they're facing, or when things are all good, or whatever it might take. So this has to go on monthly. It doesn't have to be a face-to-face, but it should be updated. It could be a phone call, it could be Skype, it could be email. It has to be documented though. So it indeed does need to be documented. It states it in the code. And basically the intent for this is that the senior site management is aware of those food safety challenges, issues, concerns, milestones that they're meeting for food safety and the SQF system. That's the intent behind this. And that has to happen at least monthly. Often this is already going on, and oftentimes this is happening daily or sometimes weekly, but basically it has to happen at least monthly. I also wanted to emphasize some of the other management commitment requirements that we have. So they're new but not to be forgotten. And 2123 is in regard to adequate resources are available. So whether that's staff, whether that's line workers, whether that's supervision or supervisors, that has to be available, those resources. 2126 is in regards to those required competencies, so that staff has the required competencies to do their job. Oftentimes the SQF practitioner is promoted from receptionist to SQF practitioner, and if they have the qualifications, excellent. If they don't, then they shouldn't be promoted. So they have to make sure that the staff has the right competencies. So the emphasis isn't just on attending a training program, but the emphasis is having the knowledge to do the job. And that goes and pulls along with 2552 regarding the competency of internal auditors. And with internal auditors, what we're seeing is our most frequently asked question is, what kind of training do they need to go through? And it doesn't have to be formal training. What we're focused on is the competency of those internal auditors. It doesn't necessarily have to focus on the training, but understanding that those internal auditors have been trained, that they have an understanding of their job, and they have the competency to do their job as well. A couple questions that I'll get to regarding this is, during an unannounced audit, what if the SQF practitioner is not there? It's okay if the practitioner isn't there during the unannounced audit. There should be a backup on site that could assist the auditor with their responsibilities, or who's doing that practitioner's job when that practitioner isn't there. So who is responsible for food safety at the site? So it's okay if during an unannounced audit, if the plant manager is not there, food safety is still a priority the production still goes on, and if there's issues that do come up, who's responsible for that? And that's what the auditor will be focusing on. Let's see. Why is there a sorry. Sorry, I lost my place. Do monthly meetings still apply if you are seasonal? Yes, they would still apply even if you are seasonal. As long as the SQF system is in, so they don't have to go, they don't apply if it's off season. So maybe that's your question. If it's off season, they don't have to apply. It's when the SQF system is in production. So that could be your question. Okay, wait, okay, sorry, I lost my track. Okay, a monthly management review meeting suffice to meet the monthly requirements meeting. As long as the goal is to provide updates to management, senior site management, and as long as it's documented, yes, then I would say it should be. Can SPC meeting be a senior site management meeting? I'm not quite sure. Again, look at the requirements in the code. In the code, the intent is that the SQF practitioner is providing updates to the food safety system, not the quality system, although if you're doing the quality code, it's about quality as well. But the food safety system, as long as food safety is included in there and it's documented, that should be okay. Who can do the internal audit in a small facility with 15 employees? You can train somebody to do an internal audit in there. The ideal internal auditor would be separate from the process that's being audited. So you don't want the QA manager to do the QA audit because that would be conflict of interest in a say. So ideally, you could have multiple people trained to do internal audits. It's challenging with these small sites, but you can train any of them as long as they have the competency to do that. And as long as it's all followed up, corrective actions are followed up with, non-conformances are identified, etc. So the question is then they have been a food safety manager for 10 years. They're with a new company. Their new company is SQF. Do you need to have a title practitioner? So a title practitioner, you don't, I mean, it doesn't, you can, as long as the responsibilities of the SQF practitioner are identified. Your title could be QA manager, but then part of your responsibilities could be SQF practitioner. So it doesn't necessarily need to have a title, but what the auditor will be looking for is how are those responsibilities delegated and who has those responsibilities. Okay, so let's move on. I tried to get to some of the questions. I might have missed some, so hopefully Leslie is capturing some of these questions that are chatting in. You guys are excellent with the questions. I will give you that. Alrighty, the next edition in Module 2 was about proficiency testing. Proficiency testing was required for all on-site personnel that conduct environmental or product testing. It's applicable for food safety tests in-house. It's to be conducted to ensure that the food safety tests are achieving consistent and accurate results, and that you can do this by like a round-robin type testing. So basically what you're trying to do is confirm that what the test that you're doing is being, that your results are consistent and accurate to a known test. So what you would do with this is send out a duplicate sample to a accredited laboratory that states, so you're looking at, let's say if you're doing micro testing or pH or whatever it might be specific to food safety, that you are sending out you're taking a duplicate sample and sending it out to ensure that how you are sampling, how you are testing, the product is consistent and meets a known result. So that's proficiency testing. It's not that the person's proficient, but basically that the test is proficient and that you are meeting and getting consistent, accurate results. 243 is regarding the food safety plan. This was the biggest addition with the least impact. Basically, in addition 7.22431, pretty much spelled out that you needed to have HACCP following codex. In addition 8, we broke it out into 17 different parts that all are subcomponents of that just basically detail out the requirements of HACCP codex. Some of the things that I wanted to point out to you specifically, 24315 states that there needs to be a full review of the food safety plan at least annually or when there's changes in the process equipment or inputs or other changes that would affect the product safety. So I just wanted to emphasize that one, that even if you added a new line, if you changed up equipment, new product, whatever, that the food safety plan needs to be reevaluated. And then 24317 is basically in regards to FSMA. It's in regards to the written food safety plan. The most frequently asked question that I get is, do I have to have 2 food safety plans, one for HACCP and one for FDA? And the answer is no, you don't. You can combine both of them. But under GFSI, we're required to adhere to HACCP, and that means your written food safety plan has to follow HACCP as well as the written requirements under the preventive controls rule. So you can mash it up into one big program, or you can have you can have 2 separate programs. It's entirely up to you. Environmental monitoring is new to the system elements, but it's basically the same requirement that was under Module 11. It's not mandatory, so it can be risked out, meaning you can demonstrate to your auditor and your certification body that environmental monitoring is not applicable to your site. And you're doing that through a risk assessment stating that environmental pathogens are not a concern to your site, either because of the nature of your product or the nature of your environment, whatever it might be, but you need to demonstrate that it's not applicable to your site, and that's conducted through a risk assessment. Food defense and food fraud was added. These are new requirements for food defense and food fraud. So what we did was add food fraud into the SQF code. And what does that mean? Basically, food fraud is broken up in, the site has to have a food fraud program that looks at it from 2 ways. Number one, it has to look at the nature of the ingredients coming into the site, so from their supplier. And so you have to look at the ingredients coming into your site to determine the vulnerability of these ingredients and susceptible to food fraud. So there are many ingredients that are already vulnerable just by the nature of their ingredients. I talked about honey, I talked about olive oil, for example. And you have to assess to determine if those threats are vulnerable and can impact food safety, and what do you need to do then to mitigate those threats. So you have to identify your vulnerabilities of your supply chain. So you're looking at just not the nature of your ingredients, the source of those ingredients. There are some countries that are higher risk than other countries. And you have to look at the economic threat to adulterating this food. So food fraud differs from food defense because food fraud is the economic adulteration of food for economic gain. So I'm going to add higher protein so that it looks like I have more protein in this product, or that I'm meeting these specifications. For example, cumin, spices are highly vulnerable, but cumin, for example, was a low commodity, so they filled it up with ground peanut shells, and now all of a sudden we have an allergen concern. So you have to look at the nature of the product coming in, as well as the vulnerability of that product and the economic threat coming into it, and do a vulnerability assessment and put in mitigation procedures for that. So that's step one, looking at the supply chain coming in. Step two is looking at it from the site's perspective, and what are the vulnerabilities of food fraud at that site. So more often that I hear is that it's basically relabeling product, extending shelf life. So if something expires, if a product expires at the site and you can extend the shelf life, then you're going to extend that shelf life, and that's an opportunity for food fraud as it relates to food safety. So you have to look at food fraud at your site and the vulnerabilities from your incoming suppliers, as well as the vulnerabilities within the site itself. Identify mitigation procedures for those identified vulnerabilities, and then monitor, reevaluate, etc., and demonstrate how you're addressing and implementing those mitigation procedures. So for food fraud, oftentimes, you have your already highly susceptible items. You have fish, for example, olive oil, honey, and those are spices. Those are already identified vulnerable items as it relates to food fraud. And so you've identified that, and there could be, again, specific countries that have already looked at and identified as a high risk. And so you're identifying these food fraud items and then putting in your mitigation procedures. So the difference with food defense versus food fraud, it's a matter of thinking. Food defense is I'm going to cause harm to the product for intentional, for fear, or to hurt somebody intentionally. When it comes to food fraud, it's not intentional harm, it's for economic gain. So there are many food fraud threats that are quality-based. So you're looking at concentration of juice, for example, that could be, I'm saying it's 10% when it's really only 5% because I diluted it because water's cheaper than sugar. And so so it's a matter of thinking. And then you're looking at it from different perspectives. With food defense, it's a threat assessment, still implementing mitigation strategies. It's a different approach for procedures in building your food defense program and monitoring your food defense program, as it is for food fraud, where you're looking at your vulnerability assessment, understanding the impact to your products, and then putting in your mitigation procedures and your controls and addressing these requirements. So it's a different approach. Both are included in the audit now, and both are to be reviewed by the auditor itself. There's lots of information out there. I know SS Safe is one of those. We talked about that. PwC is another one. Michigan State has a great food fraud program. USP, some of it is free. Michigan State is USP. You do have to pay for some of that. And then there's a PAS, or a publicly available standard, that is a guide to protecting and defending food and drink from deliberate attacks. So you can look at many of these resources that can help you build your food fraud program. I'm going to move on through because I know we're running way behind, so I'm not quite sure if I'm just going to keep plowing through until Leslie kicks me off the webinar. So I'll try and get to your questions at the end here. Another addition to Module 2 was allergen management, and these are the enhanced requirements for labeling and what we're doing as it relates to product changeovers as well. So one of the things that I wanted to clarify here for allergen management is what we added in 2811. And we did add wording in the code that talks about allergen management programs shall include the identification, management, and labeling of products containing gluten where applicable. And so I wanted to clarify that this is only required, the labeling of gluten is only required if under a regulatory or customer requirement. So if it is an obligation to you for regulatory reasons or customer concerns, then it needs to be labeled as such. Otherwise, you do not need to relabel your products that contain gluten if doesn't meet those requirements. Okay, moving through to Module 11, and then I'll go through the other food safety codes and the quality code, and then I'll get to your questions. So Edition 8, there's a bunch of different changes in Edition 8 as it comes to equipment cleaning and sanitation. The most frequently asked question that I get is what should be included in equipment specifications. Please go to our guidance document. Our guidance document added this in there. So it provides much more detailed information as to the expectations of equipment specifications and procedures. So please go to our guidance document on our website, sqfi.com, under this requirement 11291. So specifications, what we're looking for is a detailed description or feature of the item, an outline of the technical details and those requirements, and the intended use of that purchased equipment or item. And the procedures is really the process in which the equipment is identified, purchased, installed. It should include who's in the purchasing decision process and the right and how to choose the right equipment for that task. So again, what we're seeing and what we've seen in the past that has caused outbreaks actually is the wrong equipment being purchased for the wrong task. You know, a potato washer to wash cantaloupes, or if you're a peanut-free zone and you're purchasing old, used equipment from a peanut factory, that wouldn't be a good thing. So again, it's identifying how the equipment is purchased and why it's in the intended use of that piece of equipment itself. In Module 11 for water and air quality, the most frequently asked question I get is where is the testing point for water? And according to the code, what we've clarified is that we want water tested in the site. Now, municipalities always give the water quality results to the site, but what we want now is testing in the site at the point of use. It could be a hand washing sink. It could be where water is added to the processing point. It could be any of those areas, but we want water to be tested within the site itself and not just relying on municipality records. For storage and handling, the most frequently asked question that I get is, I don't really get a frequently asked question for this one. I'm sorry. I just wanted to put this in there because this was a big ad. What we had was a big emphasis on where products were stored, but not so much the conditions of how those products are being stored. So 11611 is that a storage plan is now required. 11915 is that we added controlled disposal of trademark material, and that could be product or packaging material. So if you're making a hamburger patty for McDonald's, for example, that's their trademark material. And so how is that being disposed of to meet the customer requirements? And then 11916 is the added requirement for waste for animal feed, and how is that being handled? So going into changes to the primary, these are a summary of the key changes that we had. I will say I haven't gotten many questions regarding primary, so I don't have an FAQ for primary. I'm sure there are many FAQs for primary, and I just haven't heard of them, but I just kind of wanted to share some of the key requirements that we had, specifically 243, which spells out that you can have a HACCP base model, and we spelled out the requirements for HACCP-based model in primary. We consolidated the allergen management requirements so they're more applicable for primary production. We added more requirements for storage, especially controlled atmosphere storage, and we modified the exclusion of domestic and wild animals from growing fields to the control of those animals. For storage and distribution, there was a lot of changes, especially to address the risks of storage and distribution and the actual storing and distributing of products. But the most frequently asked question that I get is regarding the food fraud program. So what is the requirement for food fraud for storage and distribution sites? And the concern is that as a storage and distribution facility, there's no control of the product that they're receiving. They're looking at the storage and handling requirements for that product, but they're not validating that that product is coming from or is meeting any type of food fraud requirements. And so in the SQF code, it doesn't spell out that you have to look at incoming materials. What it is that it's the potential threats within the site. So the food fraud program is specific to the storage and distribution site, and it doesn't. The suppliers do not need to be included in the assessment there. For manufacture of food packaging, again, a lot of different changes and more specific to the risks of food packaging. It includes information about, how labels are printed and validated. It includes information about recycled material. And it also adds information about environmental monitoring. And that's one of our biggest frequently asked questions regarding what are the environmental monitoring expectations for packaging manufacturers. And basically, for this requirement, the focus mainly is on paper products. With the exception of paper, as many of them don't support, except for paper, many of them don't support the growth of bacteria, such as glass or brittle plastic or flexible packaging. So the focus is really Bacillus with paper. And what it comes to be with those other packaging types is that their GMP program has to be in place to address the potential for any type of biological cross-contamination, and the verification of the GMP program is recommended, so that testing of packaging material is based on a risk assessment. So primarily this is for paper products, but the evaluation of a risk assessment for any type of packaging should be conducted. The quality code, again, we separated this out. If you are already level 3, I would say you're 85% compliant with that quality code. There is about 15% additions added, and that's basically with SPC, and that's got to be our number one asked question is, can a site exempt out of the SPC requirement? And I'm not going to say no, and I'm not going to say yes. It really depends on the site, but bottom line, SPC is about process variation, and there needs to be some type of process controls in place to ensure that consistency is going to be maintained. So you are addressing SPC, and it could be statistical, could be automated, it could be, you are looking at it, and it doesn't have to be a computer program that is top-notch. It can be graph paper, as long as you're identifying what your upper and lower control limits are, as long as you're identifying where your process variation could be, and you're monitoring that and taking action if it goes out of control, then you are meeting SPC. But SPC is addressed in the following areas: 2125, the quality practitioner has to have knowledge of SPC. 2311 in product development and realization is so when new products are developed, process variation is considered. Product sampling, inspection, and analysis, where SPC is implemented, and then in training, so that appropriate personnel have the right training as it relates to SPC. So what you're looking at is developing a SPC program that addresses your process controls, your process variation, and implementing that within the SQF level, or the SQF quality code. So again, the quality code, 85% the same as what the level 3 requirements were. The other 15% here and there mainly due to the implementation of process controls. Alrighty, so for more information, as Leslie said, join our newsletter. This year, the marketing team, what they did was take a specific code requirement and highlighted it and provided more resources, answered some of your questions, definitely you can look to that for the monthly newsletter. The other things that you could go to is SQFI.com. I keep mentioning that, but you can look at any online training that we have. You can seek one of our training centers to get more information on, perhaps you want to do training on internal audits or HACCP training or whatever. That our training centers are a great source of that information. The Edition 8 code change document, we had a question about if we had our document and our checklist. All that's on our website. So go to SQFI.com under the Documents tab, and you will be able to search for any of that information, including the tip sheets. So for the tip sheets, go to our home page, and you can click on SQF Fundamentals, and as soon as you get to that page, scroll down, and you'll see the tip sheets. So you can look at all of those tip sheets that we have created. And then our guidance documents have been updated for manufacturing, primary, quality, and we're working on updating it for food packaging. So that should be out by the end of the month, and then storage and distribution it won't be out by the end of the month, but that's the next thing we'll be working on. So we have all of that information that's available for you right there. Also, and I know that Leslie talked about this, and I see you guys are chatting, and actually I see you're answering each other's questions, which I think is absolutely awesome. So it's just a whole chat forum going out there. But if you want to continue this dialogue, come to the SQF conference. So there was about 500 people on this webinar, and you're all chatting and answering each other questions. Think about the dynamics talking face-to-face with somebody. If you have questions about SQF and the code or food safety or challenges, come to the conference, because you'll meet 800 chat buddies face-to-face, and you can talk face-to-face, come up with solutions, engage in dialogue, and better yet, you can exchange business cards, and now you have a chat buddy to throw off food safety ideas for forever. So you have the opportunity to network with 800 people. You have an opportunity to meet the SQF staff and ask your questions straight on to that SQF staff and come up with solutions. There is definitely technical training sessions to address the SQF code. You can earn professional development credits if you have, let's say, your food science credentials through IFT. This meets those professional development credits for IFT. And you can participate in industry roundtables. We have SQF, we have pre-conference training courses specifically on environmental monitoring, HACCP for food packaging, implementing the SQF quality code, and we have a food defense and crisis management course there. And then also we have our scholarship students. So SQF or FMI, our parent organization, issues 15 scholarships to students that are interested in food safety and auditing as a career. And so you can meet our scholarship award winners as well. So at the conference, it's October 23rd through the 25th, so it's just around the corner in Atlanta, Georgia. I outlined a couple sessions that I think you would want to go to learn more about Edition 8. On Tuesday, there's a lot of engagement with the entire conference. So there's a kickoff about shaping the future of food safety, where you'll learn the stakeholder survey results. You'll learn about SQF. There's also knowledge swaps with your peers on Edition 8 implementation. So you'll have knowledge swaps in industry, food sector categories, as well as within particular subject matter areas itself. On Wednesday, there's a couple breakout sessions that would be great if you're interested in learning more about environmental monitoring, learning more about maintenance and sanitation, learning more about what those SQF top non-conformances are and how you can avoid them, and learning about quality code certification. And on Thursday, we have sessions on food fraud detection. We have sessions on storage, transportation and storage. We have a session on sanitary equipment and design. We have sessions on the food packaging industry and another session on environmental monitoring. And then Thursday afternoon, we have the recap in our town hall session where, again, it's another chat forum frenzy where you can chat in your question and get answers directly from the SQF staff as well. So our conference has so many pluses to it. It's not just the sessions, but it's the networking opportunity. I really encourage you to participate in our conference. I think it's one of the best conferences that are out there. And I know you think, oh, because I work for SQF, but I attend a lot of conferences, and you can talk to any of the CBs, but and our partners that attend. And it's one of the best conferences out there for networking. So come to the SQF conference. I want to thank Lloyd's Registers for participating in this webinar and sponsoring our webinar. So for Lloyd's, we share a lot in common. Number one, we are a Farm to Fork standard, and so is Lloyd's. Lloyd's is a Farm to Fork certification body, and they have expertise ranging in all areas of the spectrum when it comes to food safety. They have their expertise not just in auditing, but in other areas as well. And also they're not-for-profit as well as that's what SQF is. We're part of the Food Marketing Institute, and we're a not-for-profit organization. So Lloyd's is one of our newest certification bodies joining us. They have a global presence. So if you are seeking certification or seeking a certification bodies, check out Lloyd's. And you will be getting their contact information when you can see when you download the presentation, you'll get their contact information as it relates to Arissimo or any of the Lloyd's contacts that are out there. And I also want to say that one of the pieces of the SQF conference is the release of the stakeholder survey. So the point of the stakeholder survey was to understand our stakeholder expectations. We had over 650 responses, which is a great response rate. The full results will be provided at the SQF conference. One of the questions that we had is, what is your primary purpose for achieving and maintaining SQF certification? And I wanted to point this out because the primary purpose that they said is to improve their food safety system. It wasn't just because it was a buyer requirement. It started off to be a buyer requirement, some of the responses stated. But in the end, they're going to continue to do it because it improves their food safety system. And I think that's a just tell-all of what the SQF system does. If it's implemented properly and you're doing it for the right reasons to improve your food safety system, and you'll see that in a sense it pays for itself out there. And with that, I'll take your questions and your thoughts, any ideas that you have. I think I'll go till 10 after or 30 minutes after the hour. So I'll take your questions for 10 more minutes, if that's okay with you, Leslie. We can go for an extra 10 minutes. I don't even know how long this webinar is. Okay.
That's okay. We had it booked until 1:30, but we can go over that. And actually, if it's okay with you, LeAnn, I'm going to stop sharing the presentation and start sharing my screen so that I can point people on the website to where they can find the fundamentals tip sheet.
Yeah,
and
that would be
the
great.
checklist. So while you look through the chat, I will do that.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and answer these questions, and you go ahead and show people the website, and I might interject if you feel free to speak over me if you want. Okay, let's see. Okay, I don't even know where I left off, so I'm gonna. If I missed your question, I apologize. If I missed it, you can retype it if you want, or.
Sounds good. So I'll let you read that. And guys, I think you can see my screen, but I minimized the chat, so I'm not sure. LeAnn, can you confirm that you see the SQFI website? Sorry.
I do. Yes, I do.
Okay.
I see it.
Okay, so this is our homepage, and I'm just going to point out a couple resources that were mentioned. Everything that we have on the Fundamentals program is right here if you click on this thumbnail. This is kind of our Fundamentals hub, and we have a ton of checklists and codes and just FAQs and all of that stuff on the side. And if you scroll down here, we have this comprehensive list of tip sheets that are incredibly helpful, and you can see they're all on different subjects that relate to starting the fundamentals program, but honestly, I think they'd be helpful for anyone, even if you're doing just the SQF program and you're new. But these are a fantastic resource. I'm just going to open one up and show you what it looks like. If only we had this years ago. This is so helpful, but this kind of breaks down subject by subject, things that you might need to do to start the program. So this is where you can find all of that. And let me go back to the home page here. And a few of you referenced the codes, the checklists, and the guidance documents. And this has so much information in it, so I'm not surprised that it was hard to find. But everything is housed on the documents page of our site. And we have all previous newsletters here on the side. These are the Edition 8 codes that when you click on one, it's open for download. Yay. And then if you go below there, there's all these other categories of items. So we have the translated codes. Below that, we have the Edition 8 guidance documents, summary of change documents, and then your checklist and a whole host of other information. So if you were not able to previously find that, I hope you now know where to get it. And LeAnn, I am done talking, so if you want to get into your questions, I will be quiet.
Sure. Okay. Actually, I'm trying to find questions.
Oh, no.
Everybody's been answering all their questions and, like, providing resources. This is amazing. I love it.
Yeah. Here, let me pull up in the chat. I had one. Let me stop sharing this. I had one, and I will go back to the presentation, like a presenter chat, and I was trying to pick out all the questions and send them to you, but that might be on your sidebar.
Oh, okay. Oh, let me go there then. Thank you.
Do you see that? It says presenter chat.
Oh, okay. Okay. Oh, this is awesome. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Okay, I answered that one. So the question is, I'm an SQF practitioner and was planning to do advanced practitioner. Do I need to go through a course or can I take directly the exam? So the question about one of our training, so SQF has a training program called SQF Advanced Practitioner. So you have your implementing course, which is the basics about SQF implementing. Now the advanced practitioner course is something that we designed for practitioners that want to learn more about how to use their data. Basically, it's identifying food safety objectives, it's creating KPIs or key performance indicators, and it's looking at how to utilize that data better, all right, and building a stronger food safety program on the results of everything that you've collected. And our training centers, many of our training centers offer the SQF Advanced Practitioner course. And we also have an examination component. Now, the examination component really demonstrates your knowledge of the SQF course, but it's not the training course itself. So you can take the exam to see if you need to take the course, perhaps. I don't know, but we have actually, and we offer it every year at our conference, the SQF Advanced Practitioner course, but it is sold out. When I checked in on it yesterday, it was sold out, so that's why I didn't put that as one of our training courses. So if you want, I would contact one of our training centers that are listed on our website, and they can do the advanced practitioner course if you're interested. Can you define senior management? So again, senior management is senior site management, the senior-most person on site at the facility. So you might have a corporate entity, but it is really what we're looking at is senior site management and who's on site and how are they being updated about the SQF food safety system. So 2131 is regarding the policy manual. Nowhere did I find stating what a policy manual consists of. Yeah, we put the policy manual actually in under records now. So if you look under documents, not records, under documents. So under 221, it's under the policy manual is now under 221 under documents. So the policy manual is really, we like to call it the window into your business. So it's listing all of your policies and programs, and oftentimes what many sites do is they look at the requirements under the SQF code, And really the policy manual is just kind of a link to where that policy is. So if you have your pest control policy or your sanitation policy or your recall program or whatever it might be, that's kind of what you're looking at as well. What makes the FDA Food Defense Plan Builder software not compliant with FSMA? Honestly, I don't know. So that's a good question. I don't know that it's not compliant with FSMA. I honestly, I can't answer that question because I'm not quite sure what isn't compliant or incompliant. So that's something that I'd have to look into. What if the senior site management is the SQF practitioner? That's a question that I get with small suppliers. So because sometimes that small supplier is basically, you know, they've got two people and the senior most person is also the senior most food safety person. So the intent is to ensure that there's checks and balances in the site as well, that food safety is being addressed. So maybe it's something that you can share as a staff meeting and staff meetings as well. So again, not just that the senior most person knows about the food safety, but there's checks and balances to ensure that any issues, concerns are being addressed. We are a small facility and would like to be SQF level 3. Will the amount of product put into the marketplace impact audit type? So not quite sure if I'm following your question, but yeah, you can be, if you're a small facility, hopefully you're already at the food safety code and you want to advance to the quality code. So if that's your question, it should make a noticeable impact as it relates to cost savings with labor, with product shortage, waste, etc. And it would be recognizable even by many of your retailer organizations for consistency as it relates to your quality program being implemented. For EMT, if micro-testing is done by an external lab, should we do proficiency testing for swab technique? That's a good question. Yeah, I guess you would want to make sure that you're making sure you're doing the right swabbing. So I guess you could have somebody come in and look in it. Basically, it's the testing that we're looking at. So you would want to make sure that you're doing the right swab technique. So you could have somebody come in and do the swabbing, and you could do duplicate samples as for that. Again, the intent is so that your testing, you're getting accurate results. If you're questioning, if you believe your swabbing technique, it should be included as part of your proficiency testing, then you would want to get that tested as well. Do food safety plans have each piece of equipment in the process? So if your food safety plan, but it's really looking at your diagram, your process flow. So your process flow would identify those those pieces of equipment in there, and that's in the steps before you implement the principles of HACCP. You're identifying your process flow and you're validating your process flow. So in your process flow, you're looking at how the layout of your facility is and the site, and you're including those pieces of equipment. So that should be included in your process flow for your food safety plan. What qualifies as product testing within 2542? So that's a good question, and I don't have my code in front of me. So product testing, what you're looking at is you know what, I don't have my code. I'll have to get back to you on that one. I'm sorry. Is in-house swab testing for pathogens accepted for environmental monitoring? You know, for an environmental monitoring, you have to have an environmental monitoring program that identifies your pathogens, that identifies your zones, that identifies your frequency of testing, that looks at corrective action when there's when something is out of limit. So you can do in-house swabbing for that. You just need to make sure that it's done appropriately and that the right methodology is outlined and that you're following the right methodology. How is a documented risk assessment demonstrating that environmental monitoring program is not applicable to our site different from requesting an exemption? It's basically the way to get an exemption. So what you need to do is do a risk assessment that outlines your potential threats to environmental pathogens or the lack of threats to environmental pathogens. So if you're saying, you know, environmentally Listeria and Salmonella are threats and we have low water activity or in our product, or we have an enclosed system and so threats are, you know, or we have a thermal process or whatever it might be, is stating that, you know, we are eliminating that threat from it. So it's identifying the potential threats and how those threats are being controlled. You know, the risks of the likelihood of it occurring, et cetera, and then how that's being controlled. So doing a risk assessment is to get the exemption to environmental monitoring. If in that risk assessment you've identified that environmental pathogens are indeed a concern, then you have to implement your environmental monitoring program. So if you are a co-packer and we have ingredients provided to us, is food fraud a requirement? So if you're a co-packer underneath SQF and you have ingredients provided to you, then you would have to have a food fraud program. If you're a co-packer underneath another SQF certified site, then that co-packer is going to ensure that you have some type of food fraud program in place. We are a packaging manufacturing company. We recently became SQF Edition 8 certified. I'm still feeling my way through all the requirements and what exactly applies. If anyone else is in the same type of market, they would like to contact this person. So again, a nice chat forum going on here. So 11291, does it apply only to new equipment or does it apply to all existing equipment? So that's a good question. Basically, what you're looking at is you already probably have those procedures for existing equipment. You've already purchased it. You've identified how it should be cleaned. You've identified the intent of that particular piece of equipment. For the most part, I would say it mainly applies to equipment new to the facility in there. Storage and distribution, what do we need to include? Only the risk when we store the product and when we distribute it. So for storage and distribution, mainly the risk is how you receive, how you store, and how you distribute the product. There are potential threats in there, but you also do, you know, monitoring, cleaning, like your cleaning chemicals, for example. If there's a difference between what you purchase and store to distribute and sell versus what you purchase to use within the site and how that's being handled. So it depends on what you're doing at your facility. There's different threats as well. There's the drivers, you know, that can, and having access to product and potential threats there and how drivers are being managed. It's looking at pest control, it's looking at temperature control, you know, it's looking at sanitation. So there are different risks as it relates to storage and distribution, but primarily it's how you receive product, how it's stored, and how it's distributed for sale. What percent for SQF food safety certified are also food quality sites? I apologize. It used to be under Edition 7. I would say it's 50-50. I don't have an exact number, but I would say probably 70-30. We had some sites that were level 3 that didn't go through the quality code that were waiting a year to implement. What kind of training or competency is required for SPC? So basically for the food quality practitioner, they have to have knowledge of SPC. It could be any type of knowledge. The auditor is going to understand the competency of SPC as it applies to the site. It could be in-house training. It could be online training. There's a lot of different SPC training that's out there. And so it really kind of all depends on the knowledge of that person. It's, you know, it all depends on the existing knowledge of that person and what else they need to know. So when should you ask for the quality code audit? When you are setting up your, it has to be prior to your on-site audit. So if you want to change the scope of your certification to include the quality code, it has to be before your food safety audit commences. So either that or you have to wait a year to do it. Or you don't have to wait a year. Actually, you can do it at any time, quite frankly, because the quality code is separate from the food safety code, so you can do it at any time that you want. It just can't happen during the just can't happen. A scope of certification, if you change it, can't happen once the audit has commenced. So you can close out the food safety code and then immediately have the quality code audit, but it just can't happen once the food safety code has commenced. Okay. How do you document the proficiency of an internal auditor, or do you mean the competency? So it's not what you're trying to do. What the auditor will do is look at the competencies of that internal auditor or internal auditors, and they would ask them questions for that. So they might ask, how were you trained? And they're going to look at your training records for those internal auditors. And then they're going to ask specific questions about internal auditors, how they're marking non-conformances, how they're following up on corrective action, that kind of instance to determine their competency. How do they look at certain programs? How are they interviewing staff? They'll ask that to kind of gain competency for that particular person. Do you need to check the food safety codes and the quality codes to get the codes for both, or are both incorporated into the quality code? In order to have a quality code certification, you need to have a food safety code certification. So if you don't already have a food safety code certification, then it would be implied that you're going to do food safety and food quality if you want to do food quality. So if you already have a food safety code certification and you want to do food quality, then you have to let your certification body know. But if you want to do both, like if you just say, I want a food quality audit, they'll assume that you'll have to have the food safety audit as well. For environmental monitoring, when we do swabs for salmonella, do we need to verify these findings with a yearly test by a certified body? So basically, if you are doing your environmental monitoring program, I think this is a combination of proficiency testing as well as environmental monitoring program. It's kind of how you set up your environmental monitoring program. Honestly, if you're doing annual, monthly, weekly swabs, it's completely up to you depending on the risk to your product and your process, the nature of the pathogen, your frequency for testing, etc. So you would really need to determine how you want to get that done. If it's proficiency, then you would send it out to, depending if you're doing it in-house, you would send it out to an accredited laboratory to make sure that you are doing the test correctly and getting accurate results. How should we handle and document extended shelf life on products? That's a good question. How would you handle and document extended shelf life on products? I guess I'm not quite following how you would do that, like the nature of the question. If you're extending the shelf life, that would be in your product development, and you would want to make sure that as it relates to food safety, that nothing would be compromised, and same thing with quality. So you could do challenge tests, you could do, monitoring, whatever, but it would probably be addressed in your product development stage. Don't know. So there was a question on environmental monitoring program. Is only the RA mandatory? Oh, the risk assessment. Sorry, I wasn't following what RA was. Is only the risk assessment mandatory? So here's the thing with environmental monitoring. You are either going to demonstrate through a risk assessment whether you need an environmental monitoring program or whether you're going to be exempted out of environmental monitoring program. If your risk assessment determines that you need an environmental monitoring program, then the remaining requirements should be adhered to for your environmental monitoring program, and that identifies the frequency, the types of pathogens identified, the frequency, corrective actions taken, etc. So if your risk assessment determines that you need an environmental monitoring program, then you would follow all the requirements under 2.4.8, all right? If your risk assessment determines that you do not need an environmental monitoring program, then that particular requirement would be marked non-applicable or exempt. Okay, how should the extension of shelf life of products be handled and documented to make sure no fraud is being performed? You know, that's determined on your process and your product. So it really kind of all determines, you know, how that could be conducted. So to ensure that there is no food fraud on site, you're really evaluating it to determine, one, if it's even a potential threat or, you know, a vulnerability at your site. And then if it is, then you're determining how that should be conducted and how that should be mitigated as well. On the 2.3.4, are we required to conduct the external audit of the facility, or can we just require our co-man to share their results, their third-party audit? It kind of all depends on the risk of the co-man and the risk of the product or the process or where the co-man is. It's based off of your evaluation of the co-man. What you need to determine is making sure that that co-man is meeting the requirements of the SQF program as well as your requirements and specifications. So again, it depends on the risk. So it's based off of risk to determine at what level do you want to look at the audit results, or do you want to go out there and visit, or do you want to look at those third-party audit results? So again, it depends on the risk. It depends on previous in the history of the site as well. So, alrighty, I think we've run out of time. I appreciate all your participation. I am completely overwhelmed and excited all at the same time. So I really appreciate all of your participation on this. And again, I really appreciate the Lloyd's Register for participating and sponsoring this learning lunch. I believe I think you can go to Lloyd's and find out more information. So I'll close it off from my end, and then Leslie, you can wrap it up and tell everybody what they're going to expect. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, LeAnn. Thanks for such an awesome presentation.